All right, welcome to Better Mental Health, a podcast for men looking to build a resource and community around destigmatizing mental health. I'm Blake.
I'm Blair.
And I'm Jamie. And in this episode, we found an AskReddit thread that's been gaining traction and thought it would be good to discuss on the podcast. Blair, since you found it, do you want to read the question to kick us off?
Yeah, let's get into it. So I was perusing Reddit the other day, found this one, and I was like, well, this would be perfect. Sent it to you guys. The question is, men, why do you often say you're fine when you're not? Has 12,000 comments, and a lot of the top ones really resonated with us. So Jamie, I think you had one that I think one of the top answers, you were like, yep, that's me.
Yeah. No one really cares. I think the actual verbiage in the Reddit thread was nobody gives a fuck. But yeah, I relate to that one. I feel like when I'm feeling that way, it's mostly because I feel ignored or looked over whenever I do bring something up. Like it's like nobody and I know this is a big generalization. I shouldn't say nobody, but it's just easy to fall into that generalization. But it's like when you share something, people don't often double click. That's what Lauren and I say a lot, is like to double click into something and just sort of be like, oh, well, tell me more about that. And like, let's dive in. They're sort of like, oh, bummer, man,
Yeah.
and then they move on or start talking about themselves or whatever it is,
Or the worst, this is something I also saw on Reddit, but it was like my worst fear realized. And it was a guy like starting to talk about like his problems or something going on in his life. And the like people in the group around the table started like having little side conversations, and he just kept talking and noticing that everybody started to like pay less and less attention. And you're just like,
yeah.
Who
am I talking to? You just start talking to you slowly fizzle out.
Yes. Yeah. I was like,
that is the most deflating feeling ever.
Yeah.
I'm going to share this thing, and then everyone just moves on to something else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think that the general feeling is everybody is in their own world. Everybody finds themselves to be the most important person on the planet, which is natural. We're humans. And so I think a natural result is that people tend to not know how and not know what to do when you bring up something that's hard. And I think that it's like a natural reaction to avoid a hard feeling. And so I don't know, I just feel like the more we can get people to know how to respond to people when hard situation comes up.
Yeah, well,
so you think it's more people not knowing how to handle, like you, for instance, bringing up something that you're dealing with, and the person who's listening, they just don't know how to handle it, so they move on, or they don't know how to like drill down? What? I guess it depends on the person, obviously, but
it definitely depends on the person. I think it's either like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's either that or they genuinely are just sort of like more like self-interested and just sort of switch over to themselves,
That's a common
and for I think it's more common. And but I do think that like societally we haven't been taught how to be with people in hard moments. I think that that's not like a training you get. Like, I think me and Blair are getting that training because we're going to school to be therapists. And I think that that's a part of the process. It's like you're taught, and your skill set is around being with people in hard emotions. And
I was curious, like, do we think that men specifically then are taught how to be with someone, how to double click into something that someone's saying less than women are? It is more natural for women to do that.
Yeah,
well,
I think
women
so.
are in society are from the conversations that I've had. I feel weird speaking for women, but in this podcast, but from what I've heard from women in my experience, it feels like women are taught through society, through everything, to like caretake. And I think with that comes, caring about someone's mental state.
Yeah, emotional state. Yeah.
I think that women also are just more comfortable with their emotions, and it's more acceptable for them to have emotions and be emotional. And there's all sorts of other, of course, things that come with being a woman that we can't talk to. But I think that aspect is something that allows women to then open up in conversations with their girlfriends and talk more openly about whatever's going on. So yeah, as men, what are like some of the messaging we get as like kids for
Well,
around this
yeah,
stuff?
because I mean, let's be honest. I mean, one of the main emotions that like it's acceptable to have as a man is anger. Like that. That's like the one acceptable, like
Yeah.
emotional. You can have like you can even have like an angry outburst sometimes, and it's. I mean, sometimes in a work setting, it's even acceptable. And sometimes even like admired, or that person will look like they are the one who takes charge or
Passionate.
is passionate. Yeah. And you look at other forms of emotional expression, and sometimes it feels like we've come a long way from where we used to be, but I think it's still true that like young boys are really not told that it's okay to show those other types of emotions, or they're shamed for it. They're made fun of it for it. So
Yeah.
and then you grow up with that, and you learn to kind of suppress a lot of that. And
Yeah.
then when you get to the point where you are trying to share something that you're going through, if you're sharing it with another guy, they're have the same kind of emotional repressed state that you might be
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
and don't know how to
Yes.
handle it.
Yeah, it is a certain type of I think it's like a passed down like generational like male trauma that we all have, is this idea that anger is like the only acceptable emotion that we can have. And I think that we all perpetuate it because it's what we know. And so when there's something that we can't handle that comes up, I don't know if you guys experience this, but like when I can't handle something, my tantrum energy is like, I want to hit something, break something,
Break things. Oh my
yell.
God.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's ways to, and that's actually a good thing. Like you do need to get that out. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Have you ever gone to a break room?
I would love
A
to.
rage room.
Rage room.
Rage
Yeah.
room. Yeah.
I have never,
would
but it
love
would be,
to.
yeah, I feel like that'd be a great thing for me. The other
Although
thing,
I would like it to happen right after something like shitty, or like right at the perfect moment.
Oh, I know.
Because I don't
That's what I
really
was,
feel it unless.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
can
gonna
you
go
go
in
to
there
one
like,
on demand, or do you have to
Yeah.
make a reservation?
Yeah.
that should be like, yeah, membership. Like, all right, I'm feeling angry. I need to go now. That'd be
Yeah.
way better than, yeah, like booking it in advance. You're like, I'm not even angry right now. I don't want to break anything.
Maybe that's something we'll all have to do as something that we can share on a future episode.
That would be awesome. That would be a really good idea. The other thing that came up, and I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about it, but it bothers me still in some relationships in my life. But like, not when I'm necessarily sharing feelings, but well, yeah, when I was sharing feelings, I get that's gay.
You still get that?
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't think it's from anybody my age or younger. I think it's like men a little bit like 38, 40, around that time. And
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just specific men that I've hung out with. I went on a golf trip not too long ago. And
Yeah.
that like the
Bros.
verbiage was just like thrown around so willy-nilly. And anytime
Yeah.
I've had to confront people about it and be like, like, what is that? And then
Yeah.
because I'm upset, it's like, oh, you can't take a joke. It's like, no,
You're
no.
sensitive.
What is the joke? Like,
Right.
just,
Right.
like, can you just take me to the end of the joke? Like, that's what a joke is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so frustrating. That's like, okay, yeah, you like men. It's like,
Yeah.
and that's
What exactly is
bad.
Yeah. And yeah, does that make me somehow like a person to laugh at? Because it's like whatever
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
or
So
less of a man because of whatever it was that I said or did?
yeah. If I could die forever, that'd be great.
Yeah.
It gets into the whole topic of, and I think we need to like have a whole episode on toxic masculinity and the ways that we have also participated in it.
Yeah. Be cathartic.
Yeah, I think that's sort of just a general response to being a man growing up in our society. There were times where we probably said that joke when we were younger and thought it was funny.
I think that's maybe what made it more frustrating, is because it was like, not only the year that we're in, but it's like the age that we are now. It's like, dude, seriously?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
is still like something that you think is okay and funny?
Yeah, and it almost seems like a defensive reaction, and hopefully this kind of brings us back into the original discussion too. I mean, it seems like a defensive reaction to like, I don't want to deal with or I don't know how to deal with like this thing that you're bringing up because it's too like emotionally deep for how much that person can handle. And so it's just
Yeah.
natural, like I'm just going to deflect and like whatever, I'm going to try to change the subject or make a joke out of it because I actually don't know how to get into it. And
Yeah.
I think that does kind of bring us back to, in that case you shared something, Blair, and it was just like shut down immediately because this person chose to just like turn it into, in their opinion, a joke. So I, be interesting, is that why he decided he had to do that because he couldn't handle wherever that conversation was going?
Yeah.
And is that why we tend to feel alone?
Yeah. And then that's the reason we don't want to like bring up feelings and talk about it and say we're fine, because if that's the response you've gotten your entire life as a man, like anytime I bring it up, someone's going to make a joke of it. Like, all right,
Yeah.
well, it's just easier not to bring it up. I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Jane, what were you saying?
Yeah. Well, I also have another theory, which is sort of rooted in the fact that we're obviously all three white straight men. Growing up as a cis hetero white male, we aren't challenged very much. And so I think that to have to sort of like face complicated ideas and conversations and have to start to understand things forces you to be a deeper thinker. And I think when you're in the comfortable position, you're not being forced to like think and challenge your mindset very much. And so you end up just sort of falling back into easy old habits. And I think that that's kind of what is happening for a lot of men.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions I think that might be helpful for this is like, what would be a good way to get men who are stuck in that habit to break out of it or start thinking a little bit differently and actually start checking in with people and being willing to go into harder conversations?
That's really tough because you're talking about, teaching an old dog new tricks, so to speak. Especially, for maybe guys like Blair was talking about, like in their later 30s, 40s, and older. How do you break through to that person to show them that, you know what, you can go a little bit deeper than this. In fact, it's probably better that you do for your own mental health. I guess I'm curious if you guys have any examples of like when you've been able to do that for anybody, like maybe somebody who you never thought you could get to like a deeper conversation with that you managed to break through a little bit. Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I feel like Blair would be the one to have done that more than all of us.
Yeah. I mean, I've had it with my brother Brett, who's 4 years older than me. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what we were talking about, but I felt like he was pretty rigid in what was being what we were discussing, and then I could kind of see the walls were kind of tumbling down a little bit, and he just started, being more open with what he was actually dealing with and facing, and it felt like a really good moment.
You can kind of show others that it's okay to do that by being an example yourself. And I think both of you guys are great people. I love the double click analogy, by the way, because I think that is something that everyone can resonate with, where you've been like sharing something and then the person just doesn't know how to be like, even if it's something basic, like, oh, how was your day? Well, this, something happened. It was kind of annoying. And then, maybe they'll ask, oh, really? What was it? And then that might be as deep as it gets.
Yeah.
And it's really not that hard to just, if you're actively listening to the person you're talking to and you're picking up on some detail that they bring up, it's not too difficult to say, tell me more about that. Just by doing that, like, I know I've had people tell me like, oh man, you're great to talk to. Like, you're a great, conversationalist. And I'm like, I barely said anything. All I did was I was just asking them questions. I feel like I used to use that as more of a defense mechanism because I didn't know like what to say. Sometimes I didn't feel like I had anything to share, so I just like, well, I'll just keep asking this person questions.
It's probably the
And
reason I'm pursuing therapy. It's like I just like, oh, this is the thing that I do because I don't like talking about myself. So this is great.
yeah, but when it is reciprocated and somebody is like asking you deeper questions and they really are like genuinely interested in what you're saying. I mean, you guys are both great at it. I remember my aunt was like a superstar at this, and she would just make me feel like I was like the most important, like interesting person in the entire world. Like she would just be so like invested in what I was saying and would pick up on details and would make me feel heard in that just by like asking more questions. I think being an example of that, you know, to show others like it's okay to like be curious about other people and be interested.
That was the word I was looking for, because I was that prompted what I was trying to remember earlier. But like, I was in child therapy class. Was that just this last semester? And we got into dyads, and the prompt for dyads, like one-on-one, interactions with a person in the class, partnered up, and the instructor was like, okay, what is something you didn't receive from your parents as a child? And my brain went because I was like medical stuff, Christian Science, but after we all as a larger group started discussing it, and like every single one, if you just like kind of boiled it down, was curiosity. There was no like curiosity from your parent, from your caretaker, about like what's going on in your life, and just spending that time to just go into it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah, because imagine what a gift that is. Like as a child, to have like parents who are genuinely curious about what you're interested in as a kid, and allowing you to explore those interests. Like how much different things might have been.
That would have been huge. And I feel like your aunt, like that example of her, like I bet you have such a positive like feeling thinking about her as a person. And I think that's a result of her curiosity in you. And is that true? Like, do you like think of her fondly, or is there other stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She unfortunately she passed away a couple of years ago, and that was what I texted my dad. It was my dad's sister, and that's what I texted to my dad. Was she made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world, and so I will always, think of her that way. And I mean, and she was like that with everybody, it wasn't, she just had that natural, again, that curiosity. Because she did that, like I do see her in that positive light. And I think that goes true for people who can find that ability.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing, is like, if you can start to be a guy who's more curious and wants to know what's going on with other men and women, but we could do a better job being curious. And I think, we've all read this book called The Mask of Masculinity. Have you read it, Blake?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lewis Howes.
Yeah.
Principia.
Another alumni,
yeah.
People probably don't know
that. Yeah. But that is a good example of like how men tend to interact with each other in these sort of deflective spaces like sports or comedy or whatever it is, having certain masks. We kind of got to shed some of those in order to get a little deeper.
Definitely.
They always say men bond more over activities, like you were just saying, like sports or playing video games or doing something rather than just sitting there in the moment and like having a conversation.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I think, do you guys, I mean, this kind of goes back to Blair's that's gay comment, but it's like part of that is there's this like fear. I think it's a fear of like homosexuality around it. It's like if you're just having an intimate conversation with a man, that sort of like leans towards more of like female behavior, and so there's this fear that there's like a layer of intimacy. And so
yes, that's super interesting. I think that's a really good point. I feel like it's connecting. You're like, I'm connecting with this other guy like really intimately, and like I feel weird like for some reason.
Right. And that makes sense. Societally, we've been taught that that's not normal behavior. Yeah. If you're doing that, that's what you do on a date. That's what you do with women, or or two gay men would do that. But it's like two straight men having like an intimate conversation. it's okay that exists.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're gay, and even if that were the truth, then that's also okay.
Yeah. Or maybe the bigger thing is like if you start connecting with a guy on that level and you start feeling those feelings and you're like, oh, wait, maybe you start actually questioning your sexuality, and that would be like end of the world for some. So like, sorry, I cut you
I
off.
never thought of that before, but I think you're onto something with that theory, because I mean, with all this stuff, there's layers to it. I mean, part of it's your childhood upbringing, but that could be part of it too. Is like, I definitely remember growing up, like high school for sure, junior high, like kids would use that term all the time as an insult. Like for like just about anything. You'd be doing, something totally random, and somebody be like, well, that's gay. And it's like, okay, so it became this like derogatory term because of that. And so that's probably pretty deeply ingrained for a lot of men still, even for somebody who might be like say that like, they're not homophobic, but they still have that internal homophobia maybe, or fear of it.
100%.
No, I remember in college, when we got to college for, the first whatever amount of months, I hadn't like dated a girl, and one of our friends was like, said some comment like, oh, are you gay? Like, some in sort of a derogatory way. And I was like, I need to have a relationship with a woman so I can prove that I'm not gay. Just like, what is happening? Like it's so stupid. But
because even if it were true, then like,
let's talk about it.
Again, it kind of became this like the stigma that that you like didn't want to be associated with, because all of your friends and everybody else was like making fun of things being gay, quote unquote. And so there's probably just that those things are now connected, like it's negative. And if somebody accuses me of being gay, then that's a negative thing,
right? Now it's sort of shifted to like, if someone thinks I'm gay, it's like, thank you. You think I'm a nice, like, sweet person, and that it's like,
I do have a story. There was this woman, a friend of a friend who I was hanging out with, spent the day. We went to Alcatraz, and like it was a great time. And then we were out like drinking like rosé on the whatever lawn somewhere in San Francisco. And then we were back at the bar, and I had been asking these women questions all day and like actively listening, doing the thing that is gay apparently. And this woman, she was like, so like, how many dicks have you sucked? And I was like, excuse me?
Whoa.
Did she say that in like a joking way?
It was kind of like a joking way, but I was like, 0? And she's like, oh, okay. It's just surprising to me, I guess. But that's not even the full story. The full story was like, when I told that story to someone, he was like, wait, she asked that? Like, what the hell? That's so awful. Or, like, the way that he reacted was so like, I couldn't believe she asked you that. She just like was probably assuming that, since I was so curious and open and like an active listener, she probably just wasn't used to that from a straight man. So, but
it definitely
like
is
his anger,
a bit of a forward question. So I can see, if you're thinking it from that lens, it's pretty forward. But
definitely a forward question. But I could have like, if I had gotten the normal like, well, are you gay? Which would have been a little better. But it was interesting to get that from her, but then also to get the reaction of like, I couldn't believe she would ask something like that. You should have been pissed that she would assume that you were gay in some way. I was like, I didn't care. To me, it felt like almost like a compliment, because I was like, I am listening, and she's just not used to that from people. Anyways, that was a story that came to mind.
Is there another, just not to get out of the conversation too much, but is there another one of the like responses to the question that we can bring up?
For sure. So again, to get back to the initial topic of this episode was, why do men say they're fine when they're not? The one that the comment that like stood out to me was, I don't want to bum everyone out and ruin the vibe. And that stood out to me because there was like 6 months, maybe even more, where my life was falling apart. If you need to know more about that, go up, watch episode 1. And we're
You
like,
can summarize really quick.
yeah, summarize. Relationship of 8.5 years was falling apart. My mom got cancer and died within a couple months. I lost my job before that, and so like my whole life was kind of crumbling around. And people, I'd go out in social situations and they'd be like, "Hey, so how are things?" And I'd be like, "Good."
Mhm.
What do you want to know about? My mom dying, my job, or my career going kaput, or my relationship failing? So for so long, I was like, if I'm bringing things to the conversation right now, they're only going to be negative, and it's really going to ruin the vibe and bum everyone
Yeah.
out. So that
Yeah.
response really stood out to me for that reason. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's like some truth to that. Like I think that picking your spaces is important when you're in that state. I'm guessing it was like you were saying no to a lot of things at that time because you didn't want to be in certain social settings, and
for sure,
knowing who you can be around who are more open to being bummed out, or going there with you.
yeah,
Yeah, and double clicking, because I think that like if you're with the wrong people in that state, it's really hard because they're just going to make things worse for you.
yeah. And the thing is, I am so like open with things. So like when I did
Yeah.
get asked those sorts of things, I was like, not great. And I could see like people be like, oh, like, are we gonna have to have like a real conversation right now? And it's like,
So-
yeah, maybe. Like things are pretty hard right now. I feel like,
You asked. You
yeah,
wanted it. You
Yeah.
asked.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't ask what you don't. But I think that's the thing, though. Like sometimes when people do ask, they don't necessarily want to hear a real answer. They just want to like, it's part of it's a normal like societal gesture of like oh, how are things? Good, good.
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
someone from college. She was German, and I remember we had a class where we were discussing things, and she was like, the cultural difference that she notices the most is like when people in America like ask, "How are you doing?" They don't want you to say how you're really doing. They just want like a good, let's move on. But
Yeah.
in Germany, they're like, "Oh, it's a hard day. It's really shitty," and then they start
Yeah.
talking about it.
Wow.
To Jamie's point earlier, I think in fairness, there is times and places depending on what it is that you're dealing with, and you do kind of have to know, like, is this going to be a person that I am going to be able to actually share with? Because yeah, there's really nothing more deflating than when you're trying and then that person just isn't there with you presently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you do kind of have to, like, if it's somebody who's just an acquaintance who you bump into like every, once a year or every 6 months, probably not, maybe not the person who you're going to trust with, opening up with something, especially as with what you dealt with, Blair.
Yeah.
But if it's a friend, like, you hope that you can be able to share those types of things. That's the challenge, is sometimes not knowing. Maybe sometimes you think that person is a person you can share with, and then you're surprised that maybe you don't get the response that you want, or the response that you need or are looking for.
Yeah, the flip side of that is like if you end up sharing with someone and they're like a stranger and they end up like catching you and like double clicking and like you're in that moment, it's the coolest thing in the world when you get the response you're looking for, and can go deep in that random moment, because I think that those are the moments where it's like you're looking for somebody to talk to and someone actually like received you. And I can think of very few people who stand out in my head who I know as people who would do that for me. But I think of you guys, and I think of like Lauren's dad, and as an example of another man who was that for a lot of people. Like he'd just be talking to like a stranger on an airplane or wherever he was going, and like immediately would be wanting to know the real bits of what strangers were going through.
That's like the type of person you want to be, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're remembered by how we make people feel. And that is such an easy way to make people feel, like you were saying with your aunt, Blake, like the most important person. I don't know. It feels to me like it's such an obvious thing to be curious about someone and listen, but is it
Yeah.
the thing that just popped into my head too is like, is it also, it is a societal, maybe a cultural thing, but is like the society of productivity, is it like we have to be doing something productive? So, and like, I'm not going to get something out of going deeper with you and asking deeper questions and double clicking into like the tough things in your
Yeah.
life. So if I'm not going to get something out of it, why would I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe this goes along with that same idea, just that because we have more of this, like some people call it the grind set, you know, just like gotta always be grinding, it gotta always be like looking to make money, or you know, working as hard as you can. Then we just haven't, maybe part of it is what you said, Blair, where it's just like, well, this is a waste of time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better term. But part of it could just be because everybody is so focused on that grind all the time that they've never been able to slow down
Yeah.
and learn how to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a
No,
really
that's
good
true.
point. I mean, that kind of harkens back to like episode 1 where I talked about where, you know, after my dad died, like everything kind of slowed down for me a little bit more, like not as much as I probably, you know, would have liked, but I was like, okay, life is really short. So like, what are the things that are important? And like connecting with people started to become like a really important thing for me. And so life kind of slowed down a little bit. And those conversations, they didn't feel draining. When I have these deep conversations and people do go into the, you know, really dark things, does that feel, for me it still feels like enlivening? I've had people be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you're going to be you're a therapist, you're going to take on so many people's things and that's going to be draining. But I'm like, I feel at the end of like a practice therapy session that I've done with people where they're actually talking about real issues, like I feel so much more energized and
Hmm.
like alive versus, you know, weighted down in any capacity. But maybe that's another reason people don't want to double click into things. I'm going to use this forever, Jamie. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
I know, I
it's
like
gonna
it
be a
too.
new verb. I agree with you, Blair. I think that I don't know that I necessarily feel like, maybe energized isn't the right word for me, but I feel way more settled when I'm in a conversation that feels meaningful.
Mm.
Um, and then, because for me, like when if I go to parties or like wherever that's like sort of like a more like social gathering, and all the conversations start to be very surface level, that's when I start to get really drained, and I'm just like, what are we doing here? It's very introvert, experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of introverts could relate to that. But being an introvert who likes to have the deep conversations and likes to go into more important topics, I don't feel as drained by those for sure. I feel way more like this is what life is about. This is why we're here,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
I know. So I work in sales, so I very much know the small talk, like business talk, surface level, going to network events, sales events, trade shows. It's
Yeah.
all surface level,
Mm.
and that is the most draining
Yeah.
experience ever. But having a conversation like this is like, yeah, this is gonna like rejuvenate me for the rest of the day. And it's so funny because the action is the same, right? I'm
Uh-huh.
speaking, I'm listening. You guys are doing the same, just like I'd be doing at a trade show. I'm speaking, I'm listening, and yet one is so draining and one is energizing.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
interesting that the same action, speaking and listening, can have two different results.
Well, I think it's all about the energy of what it's about. It's like there's a transactional element with the sales conversations and the things you're doing. It's like, how can we be chummy in order to get your business? Or at parties, I feel like it's kind of like not necessarily the same, but it's like it's definitely just like, hey, you share, I share. Let's just tell each other who we are, and it's this transactional thing. And this one
Yeah.
is way more like energetic. Let's figure out who we are. Let's take our time. There's no like rules here.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're just here to be
Yeah.
here for each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of reminded me, and this may kind of get back to something we were talking about earlier. That idea of transactional, that's spot on, because that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what it is. And that's probably why it feels so draining. But this kind of reminded me of something I wanted to bring up earlier, which is we've all had that conversation with somebody who feels like they're just waiting for you to stop talking so they
Mm.
can speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like, for me, nothing will just shut me down quicker than like,
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I doing talking with this person? Like they clearly did not listen to a thing I just said. They were just
Yep.
waiting for that moment for me to stop talking so that they could go into whatever it is that they wanted to talk about. And they could go for,
Yeah.
minutes at a time. And then, I'm stuck there listening. And I think that is one of the things that, kind of go back to the Reddit thread, is like one of those things that can really make you feel alone or not connected in a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. And that'd be extremely draining. Since you brought it back to the AskReddit thread again, I wanted to pose, I guess, more of a discussion between the three of us. But one of the comments was focusing on problems and complaining is a self-indulgent activity that just spreads negativity to whoever is listening. Everything will change in time, and you can pretty much always just put your head down and keep going, and it will be okay.
Yeah, it sounds like what it's saying is like, don't bother wasting your time talking about your problems, because time heals all wounds. You'll move on. You need to focus on the positive. You need to focus on working, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Do you think there's any truth to that? Do you guys think that there's any
I feel like I've had that mind space before, where I'm like, I think things will be okay, and I don't necessarily need to go talk about this specific thing with someone else. But they edited their comment and they said, yes, bottling it up isn't good either, which is why it's important to learn how to let go of that energy, like journaling, meditating, something that
Yeah.
But I think that's what people, when they do have this mindset of like, oh, I don't want to complain, or just breed negativity to other people by talking about the things that are bothering me, that does come from a bottling it up. And I think that's probably, I think we can all agree, is probably not a good way to be.
I think if that's taken in the wrong direction, it's like, I think that there are circumstances where it's like, it's okay to not talk to somebody about it, but it does need to come out in some form. So yeah, like that person said, writing it down or meditating or whatever way you can kind of process something, it's important to process. But if you're just doing that to try and move past something, but you're actually just suppressing it, that's going to come out in the future at some point in some way. For me, the example is my anger. I think that, we were talking about that at the beginning, but if I'm angry in a small moment, I used to not entertain it. If I'm feeling frustrated with Lauren, for example, we're in sort
Your
of
wife.
my wife. If I was frustrated with something, I would just sort of be like, all right, I'm just going to let this pass. I don't need to talk about it. And eventually something would come up that triggered that same energy, and the anger would come out in a way that was much more aggressive and much more toxic. And it was not healthy to have that sort of moment with Lauren, and she became scared of me. And so now when I notice anger, the reason I'm able to do this too is because I've had spaces like therapy to talk about it enough to realize that this is something I need to do. But if I'm a little bit angry about something, it's more worth it to talk to Lauren about it in that moment rather than have it blow up later and have the small sort of anger moment be okay.
Yeah, there's probably a whole another episode we could do on nice guy syndrome, which I think is very much what you're talking about, because I do the same thing. Just it's easier to just not deal with this right now, and I'll bottle it up, and it always comes out later.
Yeah, always.
And many times it comes out exponentially worse than it would have been had you just
totally
addressed it in the beginning.
Yeah, because when it is in the beginning, it's again, you said it was something small. So if you just had the way, the tools to move through that, it would have been a lot easier to do.
Yeah. I think we've had those moments as friends too. I think we've all been frustrated with each other at times, and we've either chosen to share about it or not. And it's, I think it's the same kind of thing. So it's important to do with all your relationships.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to that prompt. So it was basically the complaining, just a waste of time, basically, or not. And I think, as with most things in life, there's balance to it. I think some people just use complaining as a crutch for conversation sometimes. I know some people who they always seem to have a health problem going on, and maybe they do, but it's so recurring, this like complaint, that it starts to become like, okay, is this like a legitimate concern that you're working through, or is it just something to talk about? And finding that balance, because you certainly don't want to bottle things up either, as we just talked about, that can lead to other issues. A lot of times you can tell, like, if something is consuming you to the point where you're just like, I need to get this out in some way, that's important to do. But if it becomes like just this thing that you're always falling back on to just like talk about, that's probably not healthy either. And that could potentially push you apart from others who maybe feel like they're hearing the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah.
I had another one that I found.
Yeah.
I feel like keep bringing them up, and hopefully you guys are okay with that. But
Yeah.
this one, try and follow me here. It's going to be probably a little bit longer. But my entire life as a man, I've been taught two things. I need to be coming up with solutions to problems. And if I'm not useful, I'm useless. The moment I ask for help or show that I need help with a problem, rather than being the one helping with a problem, I am then regarded as the problem. When I'm the problem, I am not useful. See above. Doesn't take a genius to see that vicious cycle unfold into some serious mental issues.
Yeah.
So the reason that one kind of stuck out to me, I've talked about this in a previous relationship for sure, but like when I feel useless, I just it is immediately like anger and uselessness are like so closely related in my experience. So like anytime I try to do something and I can't, I get so angry and frustrated. And I don't know if that resonates with either of you, but and I guess maybe that's a man thing, maybe that's just a human thing, I'm not sure.
I know what you're talking about, because like learning a new video game or something like that, and if you're like not getting the hang of it very quickly, I have seen you like get very frustrated and angry. And it's like, I'm like, dude, this is part of the learning experience.
Yeah.
I have also had that same experience, just with maybe other things. So like some things I feel like I can be rational like that, just be like, oh, this is part of the learning process for me, so I don't get upset at myself. But maybe for other things, like for me, I have a terrible memory, and like if I forget something, I kind of have that like useless feeling, like, oh, I was supposed to remember that and I forgot it. And that gets me to that similar point where I'm just like so frustrated and like angry at myself. And I think it's because I had this like, I was responsible for this thing and I dropped the ball on it.
Yeah. What you just brought in spurred other things in me of like, I do, and this maybe not, I've talked about this with my partner, Mackenzie, but like if we have this, she and I have talked about having this mindset of like, I should be good at this thing. Like, even if you've never done it before in your life, you're like, I should know how to do this, or I should be good at this. And when you're not, it's just so frustrating. But the example that came to mind with like, I should know how to do this, and then maybe it was like some form of like, I'm a man, I should know how to do this, was like, I had a flat tire on my bike, and I started trying to fix it, thought I had bought the right thing, and yeah, we'll just leave it there. That was very
No, don't leave it
frustrated.
there. I want to hear the whole tantrum.
The bike is now in the San Francisco Bay.
Essentially. No, I think I just like I ended up like talking to my cousin, who is like a amateur pro cyclist woman, and she like helped me. And there was still, even during that, I was still like frustrated that I, couldn't figure it out myself. But yeah, like it's a combination of like, I should know how to do these things for some reason, and I can't. And when I can't, I'm useless. When I'm useless, I'm angry. Yeah. So vicious cycles.
Yeah.
But do you guys have any examples of things like that, or is that me and Mackenzie experience?
No, I think that's I bet a lot of men would relate to that. I think that there's a certain level of like expectation for men to, like, you think about like classic stereotypes, like we should know how to fix a car, change a tire, change your oil, do the things that make everything work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't relate to this one as much. Probably, maybe it's just like the men I surrounded myself with, and my dad is an example of a guy who like, he wasn't someone who exemplified that. Like, he didn't act like he needed to have it all figured out in that way. So I think that was helpful for me to not feel forced into that sort of box. But I think that there are a lot of guys who grow up with dads who were sort of these heroes to them, and really, really were good at a lot of things like that because it was passed on to them. But we're growing up in an age where it's less necessary to know all these things because we can hire somebody for really cheap to do it for us. And I don't relate to it as much, but I'm sure it's a common thing.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of men probably can relate to it, because I've heard that same thing before. Like, well, if I'm not earning money or if I'm not doing all these things, then like I'm useless, and there's no point in me being around. Like, what good am I to my family if I'm not being the provider or the fixer
Right.
or whatever? And I think a lot of guys forget that just them being there, being present, like maybe for guys who have kids, like being there for your kids is very valuable.
Yeah.
Not just being the bank, you know. Yeah, providing the shelter and food and all that stuff, you know, I'm sure you want to do that for your kids, but there is also value in you being present there with them. And I think that gets overlooked. Yeah, there's value that can be brought in other ways. And I'm not sure if I even like that phrasing, because I feel like a lot of men feel that way. Like, oh, what's my value? Like, I need to figure out, like, okay, if I do these different things, then I'll bring enough value to be useful, to be part of this, you know, this situation, this family. And just you being you is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Which that in and of itself is a like a little bit of like a belief that I think that your existence is enough, and it, like, that is, I think, hard for a lot of people to accept. I don't know if you guys buy into that, like, fully. Like, you just being you and being present is enough. Like, I think that's a cool thing to believe, but it's hard to practice in reality sometimes.
We're not told that very often.
Yeah.
I think if you were told that a lot growing up, it'd be really nice and be helpful.
Yeah.
You're enough. You're good. Yeah, you're smart.
No, Blake, I think what you were sharing is huge for like the time versus like being a resource for like money versus like spending time with your kids as like a father figure. You know, I think we're taught to have that, like, you need to be the provider, and actually just spending time with your kids is going to be so much more valuable than the money that you bring. And obviously money is important. We live in a capitalist society, but like, yeah, I totally buy into that. And that's like a huge goal for me as a dad, is to be a present father, you know, with my kid. 'Cause I just think it's going to be so much more rewarding to be that dad.
Oh, absolutely.
I think you're doing a good job there.
Yeah, I would say so too. What society values is changing, I feel like. Maybe, hopefully.
I do kind of want to like flip the coin and ask you guys a question though. So even though logically we can have this conversation and know these things, but I am curious if you guys still feel like, is there a part of you that kind of wants to like know how to fix a car, how to beat, you know, like do all those things that, you know, again, we don't have to know how to do all those things now, but sometimes I still get that, like, I wish I knew how to do all that stuff.
Absolutely.
1,000,000%.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I think that masculinity in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's okay to want to know how to like build shit and fix shit. Like, I think that those things, like, I love when I learn how to use my hands and do stuff like that. Like, I think it's important to go through the process of learning things like that. But that's because it resonates with me as a man and individually. I don't know. What do you think, Blair?
No, I'm along the same lines. I would absolutely love to know more of the ways that like I can build things. And like, my dad was a general contractor, so this is probably when I do start doing a home project in the future, I'm sure I'm going to run into the like, I should know how to do this. My dad was a general contractor.
Yeah.
But that will not be the case, and I'll have to temper some anger there. That's for sure.
Don't temper the anger. I don't think you should temper the anger. You should find a way
Just
to let
feel
it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rage room.
Yeah. Just build a rage room in your apartment.
Well, but
yeah.
it's interesting because your dad was a general contractor for how long? How many years?
30 something
Yeah.
years.
And so then you're going to try to fix something for the very first time and say, my dad was a general contractor. Why can't I do this? He was doing it for 30 years.
Yeah. This knowledge should just be like, there. Transfer from genetics somehow.
I'm just saying, sometimes you have to be a little easier on yourself.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a huge lesson in my life. Go easy on yourself. Oh, man. If I have been frustrated hearing something in my life, it's definitely been that in low times, like, go easy on yourself. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I did have another
Well,
one.
then, sorry, I just told you to go easy on yourself.
No, I think it's still an important thing. In certain like mindsets, it bothers me more. But
Right.
this one was, I was just curious if you guys related to this one at all, because I do not, and I don't understand this mindset. But the comment was, again, the question being, why do you say you're fine when you're not? Anything I can say, or anything I say can and will be used against me.
Oh, I saw that one. Yeah.
Well, it's like being vulnerable then exposes you to future harm. Where it's like, oh, I express this vulnerability about myself, and then in maybe it's a future argument with like a partner,
Yeah.
that information could then be turned on them in that moment. Is that what you guys are?
That sounds right.
How will that information be used against you? I don't know that, but I'm sure there are many instances of people having information that they've shared be used against them. I was curious if you guys had examples, because that one I'm like did not resonate with me.
I can't think of any specific examples either. I think if you have somebody like that in your life where they have used some information against you, where you've been vulnerable, and then they brought it up again because they knew it would hurt, that is probably a relationship you need to take a look at.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And I get that that's easier said than done in some situations. It could be a family member that does that to you.
Yeah. No, that's
having
really toxic behavior.
I'm having a story, actually.
Yeah.
I brought this up not having an idea of a moment of this, but I had one, and now I want to share.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was talking to someone, and I showed them Field is the app that is like the non-monogamous dating app, FEELD. So I showed someone my profile, and on it like, you can list your sexuality, and mine said hetero-flexible. And then we had a full-on conversation about what that meant and what it meant to me. And and then later we like had dinner, and that person that I told was like made some joke about like, oh, maybe they're hetero-flexible, and like looked at me and like gave a little smile, and I was like, the fuck? Like we just talked about this. You're already starting to like give that information to like everybody. Again, not that I would care if everybody knew. So that's probably why I don't relate to the comment itself, because I'm like, whatever. If they don't like me for that, like, okay. But it was still like, it was a moment of like, oh, this thing, once I started thinking about it more, I was like, that was a piece of information that was very, specific and personal to myself that I shared with them, that was later like kind of delineated to you. Yeah. Or not against me, but like it was shared in a way
like
that was not safe.
A little bit, or like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think to Blake's point, then like maybe sharing, like obviously that kind of like happened by you opening up the app, and like you weren't sort of maybe expecting that to come up, but like sharing with a certain person who's not necessarily safe, or like someone that you trust, like that makes more sense.
Yeah.
But if they're yeah, so examining the relationship and making sure that that's someone.
Yeah.
Think twice
But yeah,
about sharing
it's all,
those things.
yeah.
Yeah, because if that's somebody who's gonna who you think you're gonna continue to see just
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I mean, then maybe that's a conversation to have. Like, hey, this happened and I didn't like that, or that wasn't cool, or whatever, And
Yeah.
again, some of these things are easier said than done. But if it's like a relationship that you're like, well, we were friendly, and now I feel like differently about this person. Okay, yeah, I need to evaluate. Like, do I further distance myself from this person, or do I want to have a conversation about like what they did?
Yeah.
Because maybe they didn't realize, maybe they thought they were just joking, and they didn't realize it actually like impacted you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Mhm.
very true. And it just kind of gauging whether or not that conversation is worth it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty complete on this conversation. I don't know about the two of you, but it's been great.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
this was an awesome chat, and hopefully we address some of the things that a lot of men, it seems like, are dealing with on a regular basis. Sometimes just getting this stuff out in the open is the first step to figuring out what to do next. So.
Yeah. Talk about your
Yeah.
feelings and listen to others.
Yeah, and I am curious if anything we said in response to these questions brought up more ideas, or if people have things that we didn't address when talking about some of the topics. I'd want to know what people have to say. So if there's anybody who's listening and wants to comment with their questions, that would be cool too.
Yeah. Future episode
Absolutely.
ideas, anything.
Yeah.
We're for all of it. But thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye.